Hello, this is James Taylor, and Write Your Own Story. Firstly, welcome to this podcast. I'm a hypnotherapist, a counsellor, and a life coach, and the aim of this podcast is to give you some tips, tricks, and tools so you can start to evolve and change and become a better version of who you are naturally, whilst letting go of some of the things that have been holding you back. So I really do hope you enjoy this podcast. Feel free to like and subscribe, and let's get on with it. I've genuinely pondered long and hard whether to do a podcast on this particular topic. And a bit of an advisory warning: if you normally listen to these podcasts with children present, I would recommend with this one, you don't. This is for adult ears only, so just a bit of a warning from the start. I'm going to talk about some very personal things that only a handful of people know. And this is why I felt a little bit conflicted whether to talk about it on this podcast channel. But something happened a while ago when I started making this podcast. I thought, what do I talk about? What kind of content do I give out? What help can I give out? Can I help someone who doesn't even know me, who may listen to something I say and think, you know what, I can apply that technique to me? And that was the idea for this podcast channel. But I sort of made a vow to myself that I would reveal more of myself if the podcast channel took off. If it was just a flash in the pan thing, then so be it. But if the podcast channel gained a bit of traction and it seemed to be working, then I would share more of myself and more of my backstory along the route, so to speak. This week, the podcast channel hit 2,000 plays. So I just want to say a genuine thank you to every single one of you who listens, and I hope you gain something from it. So we've reached this 2,000 plays little target that I set myself, and I thought about whether to share this story, and I've thought about it for some time. So hopefully by now, any children that are around, they are out the way and they're not going to hear this podcast. But I've got something that happened to me in the past, and this isn't scripted, so I'm just going to speak straight from the heart, really, and do so in a way that it makes me a bit vulnerable in many ways, because I don't know who's going to listen to this. I don't know what they're going to take from this. I don't know how it'll be shared or how it'll be received. So here we go. When I was about 10 or 11 years of age, I was sexually abused. And I was sexually abused by a guy who was one of the leaders in the boys' brigade. So it's a bit like a scouts kind of thing for people who are outside the UK. And I was definitely groomed. And at the time, I couldn't see that. And just to give a little bit of context around this, when I was growing up, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. I'm the youngest by 10 years. And there was chaos in the house between my mother and my father. And there was only 3 moods in the house. It was either kicking off, and there was arguments taking place, or they weren't speaking to each other. It was like the aftermath, if you like. But the one that was most terrifying for me was when it was in the air. And I knew it was going to kick off. I just didn't know when. And I remember being absolutely terrified as a child. Not a good thing to feel when you're a child, terrified. So what I would do, I would take myself off to my room with my dog, Bess, and she was my best friend growing up. And I would stay out the way. And it was almost like a prison, really. I would amuse myself, or try and amuse myself, by reading my little Beano and Dandy annuals and this kind of stuff. But I learned from a very young age to remove myself as a form of escapism, really. And when I was about 8 years of age, I wanted to run away. And I didn't know where I was going to go. But I wanted out. I wanted out of this situation. And what I did was I got myself I had a little backpack. I don't know where that came from. But I thought, right, I'm gonna get myself ready that I can run away if it gets too much. And inside my little backpack was a pair of socks. There was my Beano or Dandy Annual. I think there was a torch in there as well. And there was a tin of beans. There wasn't a tin opener, but there was a tin of beans. And even though I was 8 years of age, I was savvy enough to realise that, okay, this might go off. The beans may go off. So every now and again I would go to the cupboard and I would replace the old tin of beans that I had with a fresh tin of beans from the cupboard. And I never did run away, and I desperately wanted to. But I couldn't, for a few reasons. One, because I was 8, and I didn't know where to go. But what I told myself when I was a child was that I couldn't take Bess, my dog, with me. And I didn't want to leave her in the house with all that chaos. So I stayed. And when I look back over my life and I can see the breadcrumbs, I think that's when I started to realise I was a bit of a rescuer without realising what a rescuer is. So, my parents thought it would be a good idea for me to join the Boys Brigade. So I did when I was about 10 or 11. And there was this guy there, and his name was Chips, because apparently he used to like gambling at casinos. And he was an old man. I mean, I was 10 or 11 years of age. And he seemed really old. He was probably about 45, really, or something like that. And he used to, I remember him being very, very kind. And he would sit down and encourage you to talk. And he'd listen, nod in all the right places, get to know you. Of course, that was all part of his tactic. But it was certainly more than I was getting at home, and I was drawn to it. Around 10 or 11 years of age, not long after I joined the Boys Brigade, the sexual abuse started. Now, the Boys Brigade club was part of an annex to a church. And what he would do, and I won't go into all the details because it's not very pleasant to talk about, and it's probably not very pleasant to you to hear either. And it's probably not relevant either, all the stuff that happened. But just to give you an idea, he would call me to a side room in the church when the Boys Brigade meetings were taking place every week, and the sexual abuse started. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And after a period of time, I used to get panicky going. I remember getting panicky going to the Boys Brigade, and the little 10 or 11-year-old version of me didn't really know what to say or do to get out of that situation. And one time, there was a camp coming up, a 2-week camp. And I remember Chips asking me if I was going to go. And I said, oh no, I can't go. And he said, why not? And he caught me out. I didn't really know what to say, so I was thinking on my feet and I said, oh, we can't afford it. This is how conniving he was. Unbeknownst to me, he contacted my mum. And he had a meeting with her. And he told her that there was a special fund to help parents out so their boys could go to camp, and it was good for character building and learning maturity and life lessons and all this rubbish, and totally hoodwinked my mum. And she didn't know anything about the trip because I hadn't mentioned it to her, this camp. But she agreed to this to allow this fund to pay. So he paid for me to go to this camp. And during the camp, the abuse continued. And I was furious. I wasn't furious at my mum because I didn't know any of the backstory where he'd contacted her. But I was furious that I was trapped. And I made a decision when I got back from camp. I was leaving immediately. So that's what I did. And I was asked by my mum. My dad never used to speak about it really. But I was asked by my mum, why don't you want to go back? I said, it's just, they're all little kids there and, I don't fancy it. And I made an excuse. So fast forward about 2 or 3 years, I was staying at my sister's one weekend. And I remember having a conversation with her. I don't even know how it came up, but I disclosed to my sister that I'd been sexually abused a few years earlier by this guy. And naively, I asked her to keep it to herself. And she said, look, James, I can't. I've got to tell my mum and dad about what's happened. And I really didn't want her to, but I could understand she had to, even though I didn't want her to. So I got taken back to my mum and dad's. And when I got there, I mentioned before that I'm the youngest of 5 kids. When I got there, mum and dad were there. All my brothers and sisters were there, which was rare in itself, and their partners. And I didn't know they were all going to be there. And I remember walking into the living room, and my dirty secret was out. Everyone knew what had happened to me, and I was embarrassed. And I felt ashamed. And I wondered what they would think of me. Would I be like tainted? Because this had happened to me. And remember, the girls sort of like made themselves scarce. My mum was in tears. She'd been crying. My dad was sitting there very quiet. And my sisters and my brother's partners left the room, so to speak. So it's just the guys in the room, bit of a man talk kind of thing. And I remember hearing a lot of what they wanted to do. They wanted to take, the law into their own hands. I don't really remember, and this may have happened, but I don't remember being asked what I wanted to happen. And to be fair, if they'd have asked, I don't think I'd have known. So it was a real difficult time. And what happened was, we went to the police. And the police, I've got to say, didn't do a very good job. It was an historic event. There was no witnesses, of course. There was no forensic evidence. It was one person's word against another. And apparently the police asked him and he denied it. So that was the end of that. So the investigation, if you'd even want to call it, that was closed. And life went on. A few years after that, I was about 17, 18 years of age. And I was driving down this road. And it was quite a narrow road where only one car could pass at any one time. And as I was driving down this road, a van was coming towards me, like a transit van. And it reminded me of the kind of van that Chips had. And I was actually in the area where he used to live. So I pulled over to the side, flashed my lights so this van driver could go past. And as the van driver went past, it was Chips driving it. It was such a good job that I wasn't facing the right way to chase after him, because I just felt my blood start to boil. And I was so angry, and all them repressed feelings came up. And I remember sitting there just shaking for a good few minutes, just gripping the steering wheel really, really tight. I was so angry. And I sort of it was one of them forks in my life where I realised that he'd stolen a part of my youth. And I could never get that back. He'd taken it. but I'll be damned if he was going to take the future from me. And it was like a clear message like that. I'll be damned if you are taking the future from me. And that internal decision helped me in some way. It was like another part of me came forward and said, you are better than this, and this was not your fault, and you are not going to carry this round like a poison chalice for the rest of your life. And that seemed to help. Now, a few years later, I joined the police myself, the Metropolitan Police in London. And I remember I was living in Liverpool at the time, and I think I'd only ever been to London once. And I was in the pub on my leaving drink from my job. And one of the guys behind the bar, it was the first time I'd been in this pub, and one of the guys behind the bar was a lad called Peter. And he'd been one of the guys who'd been in the Boys Brigade. He was about 5 years older than me, maybe 3, maybe. And he was working in the bar. And I hadn't seen him since I'd left the Boys Brigade. And we were chatting as I was getting the round in for the lads I was out drinking with on my leaving drink. And he said to me, have you heard about chips? Now, I hadn't thought about this guy for years. And I said, no, what is it? He said, apparently, there's a load of kids come forward saying he's been sexually abusing them. And they were before my time when he was in the Boy Scouts. And the police had done a press article and were asking for any witnesses or victims to come forward. And I remember saying to Peter, well, I'm not surprised, Pete, because he did it to me when I was in the Boys Brigade. And it was one of them strange moments where it was like someone else was saying it on my behalf. And I said it so blasé and matter of fact, really. And Pete said, what? He did it to you? And I said, yeah, he was doing it to me. That's why I left. And he said, I had no idea. He said, hang on a minute. He said, if I'd have known, I would have done something about it. I said, no one could have done nothing, Pete. No one, don't have to. And it was me being the rescuer again. I said, no one could have done nothing, Pete. You were only a few years older than me. What could you have done? And he looked a bit embarrassed, and he went and got the local newspaper, and it was like front page news. The police calling for witnesses. And he said, what are you going to do? Are you going to contact the police? And I said, no, that happened at the time, and they had their chance, and that's that. So I didn't follow it up. I went off and joined the police, and this is before the internet and stuff. But, he got found guilty of a load of charges, and I was pleased about that. And I hope some of the people who he abused got some solace from that. And then I just got on with my own life. I joined the police, and I was a uniformed police officer. And then I was a detective, and I went working in different departments in the police. And when I look back at the breadcrumbs, it's so clear now, I couldn't see it at the time. I went into certain areas of working with the police. I actually joined the police because I wanted to help people. I don't like bullies. I don't like unfairness. I don't like people who control others. And I wanted to help. I wanted to help people who weren't strong enough to help themselves. People who might feel very isolated and alone. And there's the rescuer in me again coming out. So when I joined the police, when I transitioned from a uniformed police officer to a detective, after doing that for a bit, I started specialising in different areas. And one of the areas was on rape investigation. And then another one was child sexual exploitation. And I had other roles along the way, but the ones where children are being hurt, or with the sexual exploitation aspect, or where women are being assaulted or attacked, that spoke to my heart, and I really had a passion for helping in that area. I was asked along my route if I fancied working on the paedophile unit, and I couldn't do it. I knew I couldn't do it. I got asked one day. The paedophile unit was short staffed. It was a weekend, and one of the women on there who used to work on there, she was fantastic, and she had to do some home visits for some paedophiles who were on the books, and they had to sort of like do checks just to monitor them really. And her name was Steph, and I liked Steph a lot. She was great, and she asked me if I had accompany her on these visits for these paedophiles, and I said, "Oh, Steph, anything else, Steph, I'd help you, but really." And she said, "There's no one else. Everyone else is tied up dealing with prisoners and stuff. Can you help me out?" And she said, "And I like working with you." And me and Steph had worked together a few times, and she was great. So I went out with her on these visits, and I really struggled. I really struggled being in the company of these paedophiles. And as we were going from house to house, I was saying, "What did this one do that we're going to see?" And she'd tell me. And at the end of the day, we'd been to about 6 or 7. It was one of the hardest days in the job. I felt by even being in the same room as them, I felt like even the air was toxic. You know, what they were breathing out, I didn't want to breathe in. And at the end of the day, Steph said, "You really struggled with that, didn't you?" I said, "Yeah, I did." I didn't tell her why. I said, yeah, I really did. And I got asked by the boss of that department if I fancied working on it. Again, I didn't disclose why. I just said, no, it's not really my thing, to be honest. I think you need to be a special kind of person. And I do think that as well. You need to be a special kind of person to be able to work in that environment. I'm not that person. And Steph asked me, she said, "I know the boss has spoken to you about joining the team. Why don't you fancy it?" And I said, "You know what, Steph?" I said, "I'm not a violent person. But you know, when we went out that day, I really wanted to do harm to the people that we were visiting. And it just made me all angry inside. And I don't want to spend my day feeling like that. And I don't know how to get past it." I said, "So all credit to you for what you do, but I can't do that." And Steph just left it at that, really. Now, years later, I started to get a little bit disillusioned with the police. And I eventually left and do what I do now. But the reason for this really long podcast episode is well, there's a few reasons really. One is because I sort of like made a vow to share a bit more of myself with yourselves, and I hope you don't mind me doing that. Another reason is, we've all had bad stuff happen to us. We've all had bad stuff, not necessarily this, but we've all had bad stuff happen to us. And there's a quote that I really like, and the quote goes, "I'm responsible for my life, for my feelings, for my personal growth, and for every result I get." I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important. I'm responsible for my life, for my feelings, for my personal growth, and for every result I get. And that really resonates with me. And this thing that happened to me, would I have chosen a different career if it hadn't have happened? Possibly. Quite possibly. But there's a rescuer in me, and if I see people who are hurting or need help, I want to help them if I can. Now, if anything like this has happened to you, I promise you can get past it. Maybe speaking to a therapist might be the start of the journey. Maybe you don't need to get the police involved, maybe you don't want to, but maybe just speaking about it can help you get rid of it. And when it's out and it's gone, it's better. It really is better. If something like this happened to you, you were a child, and they were probably a bit older, maybe a lot older. maybe a trusted family member, a friend, an adult, a carer, something like this. But there was a power dynamic going on, and you were a child. And I just want to say to you, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault, and you don't have to carry that burden. So this is a bit of a longer than usual episode here. But like I say, I hope you don't mind me sharing a little bit more of myself with you here. And next week, it'll probably be back to the normal stuff that I talk about. Until maybe I reach the next milestone. But I won't say I hope you've enjoyed this one, but I do hope it's helped. And my best wishes to every single one of you. I think you're awesome.